So if you're someone who wants to do medicine in Australia, you've probably thought pretty carefully about your UCAT, your ATAR and your interview, but something a lot of people forget to think about very carefully is the application process, and that's what I'll be explaining today for every university and every medical school in Australia. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. If you don't know me, my name is Emil and I'm a first year medical student studying at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, and on this channel we talk about everything relating to medicine, so if you're new here, consider subscribing. Some of you might have noticed in this video that I've got a new YouTube shooting setup, so do let me know down in the comments what you think. And do drop a like on the video if you think it looks good. Alright, so my aim in this video is to give you guys as complete a guide to the application process as I possibly can. So first, I'll give you guys some general tips on the application process. I'll answer some of the frequently asked questions, and I'll go over each of the 14 medical schools in Australia and explain the application process for every single one of them. And finally, at the end of this video, I'll share with you guys a complete written guide that I've written up, which contains all of the universities as well as some useful links that you can look at to get more information. Alright, so let's first start with some general tips for what you can do to help yourself in the application process as much as possible. My first tip is that you should apply to as many universities as you possibly can. This is useful for two main reasons. Firstly, because if you apply to a lot of universities, it means that you aren't putting all your eggs in one basket, and then as a result, you have some backup plans in case you don't get into your first preference of university. For example, if I didn't get into my first preference, which was Monash University, I could also apply to Adelaide University as a backup since I wanted to do medicine undergraduate only. The second reason this is really good is because you can get practice interviews from real universities before your actual main first preference interview. In my case, my first preference was Monash University, but before the MMI for Monash actually rolled around, I had already done an interview with the University of Adelaide, University of Curtin, and the University of Queensland. And as a result, I knew what worked very well for me in the interview process. I knew how to set myself up to look good on camera and on the Zoom calls, and it helped me a lot in the interview process. My second general tip for applying in general is that you should keep a very close eye on the cutoff dates and make sure that you keep them in mind. The last thing that you actually want to do is to have all the unis set up and know all of the ones you want to apply to, and then forget the cutoff date and accidentally miss the closing date. I'll go over this a little bit later in this video, but for most universities in Australia, the cutoff date seems to be the 30th of September. However, the times do change from university to university, so I do recommend at least submitting all of your applications a week early just to account for any other accidental things that might occur. For example, you really don't want to run into an issue with your PayPal, for example, or your bank account and not have the payment go through, and then you want to have at least a week so that you can contact the support system and get your ticket solved before the cutoff date actually comes through. The third general tip I have for the application process is that you should create a list of your preferences for every state. Something I'll get into later in this video is that every state has a different application portal, so it's important to make sure that you have your first preference and second preference and so on listed out before you actually go to send through your application. There are definitely a lot of options to go through, but you should look through them, consider the entry requirements, how likely you think it is that you'd get an interview or that you'd get in, and then make your application based on your preferences for which uni you actually like. My fourth and final general tip is that you should absolutely do your own research. I am making this video to help you guys and give you guys a guide, but you should absolutely by yourself go on the university's websites, go on the VTAC or course page websites, and have a look for yourself what the entry applications are, whether there are any special considerations, and what you might need to do to prepare for interviews in the future. Remember to not to be afraid to contact the university, because at the end of the day, if you have the skills that the university thinks is required to get into the course, then they actually want you to go into their course because they want the best students. So make sure that if you run into anything that you don't understand or you're not sure about, send the university an email or give them a phone call and they'll be happy to help you out. Alright, so now let's move on to the frequently asked questions section, where I'll answer some of the most common questions there are about the application process. So the first question I have is, what does CSP mean and what are the fees like for medical school? So what CSP stands for, if you don't know, is a Commonwealth supported place, and what this means is that the Commonwealth will actually pay the majority of your tuition fees to go to university. To explain this a little bit more, in my case, the fees that Monash University actually charge for me to attend medicine at their university is around 64 or 65k per year. However, because I have a Commonwealth supported place, this means that I actually only have to pay 11k of those fees because the Commonwealth pays the other 50k. There are two things that are really good about this system. Firstly, the 54k that the Commonwealth pays, you actually never have to pay back. And then even the 11k that I have to pay, I'm allowed to take a loan from the government called HEX Help. And that means that I actually don't have to pay that 11k of fees up front. I can actually wait until I start working and earning an income before I actually have to start paying that money back. The second question that I get a lot is, what does a bonded medical place actually mean? So the first thing that I should clarify is that whether your place is bonded or unbonded is usually separate from your fees. Now, what a bonded medical place actually means is that all universities in Australia are required to allocate 28.5% of their places as bonded medical places. Now, what happens is those people in a bonded medical place have to sign a return of service agreement when they start medical school. And what this is that they agree that once they've finished their medical school placements, they'll actually serve as doctors in a certain area designated by the government for a certain period of time. I know this can sound sort of scary, but functionally there's not much of a difference between a bonded and a non-bonded place. It's not something that you should actually worry that much about. And for most people, if you get a bonded place, there's no real difference between having a bonded place in medicine and a non-bonded place in medicine. The next question that I get asked quite a lot is, what is the difference between undergraduate and postgraduate degrees? So this one is actually pretty funny because most of the universities and all of the course advisors treat you like you should know this from just some sort of knowledge, but you actually never get told really clearly what undergraduate and postgraduate means. To put it really simply, and probably this is what you've understood, undergraduate means a degree that you do straight away from leaving school. It's the first degree that you actually do at university, and it often leads you on to do further study at the university. Now, a postgraduate degree is different from that because you do postgraduate degrees after you've done an undergraduate degree. So you might do an undergraduate degree for 3 years and then move on to postgraduate study, which is usually 4 years or so. So in medicine, this is somewhat important because you can actually complete your degree if you do a medicine degree undergrad in 5 years, say for example at Monash University. But if I was to do the same thing through the postgraduate program at the University of Melbourne, I'd have to do 3 years of undergraduate study as well as 4 years postgraduate study, which would come to a total of 7 years, which is 2 years longer than what I'd get at Monash University. The next most commonly answered question that I'll be answering today is, what is a joint medical program? So a joint medical program is when two universities might come together and decide to host a medicine program together. A good example of this is the University of Newcastle and the University of New England, and they make a joint medical program for students to study medicine at either of the two universities. Essentially, there's no real difference between a joint medical program undergraduate degree and a normal undergraduate degree. The only thing you might have to be careful about is which university you want to select your campus location as, because some universities can be much further away to where you might be living and some universities might be closer. Other than that, the degree you get at the end of the day is pretty much the same. Now, the last question I'll be answering in this FAQ section is, do extracurriculars or work experience matter in the application process? So the short answer to this is no, because most universities only use the ATAR, your UCAT, and your interview to decide whether you get into medicine. However, the longer answer is that some universities like James Cook University and UNSW have an online written application process as well. And in these written applications, you might have to do a little bit explaining about what you might have done to show your experience or desire to do medicine in the past. So for some of these universities, it will actually matter. And also I have to say that in general, if you are someone who does a lot of work experience and extracurriculars, this can actually help you for the MMI as well, because it's more likely that you'll come across as a more well-rounded person or as someone who has shown a lot of interest into medicine. All right, so now let's get into the really meaty part of this video, which is about all of the medical schools in Australia and how you actually apply to them. So in total, I'll go over all 14 of the medical schools in Australia, but to make it a little bit easier to digest, I'll be separating them into the states. So starting off with the first state, which is my home state, Victoria, we have Monash University, which offers its undergraduate medicine program. So some quick information about this course is that it's 5 years in length. The minimum ATAR required is 90. You do need a UCAT and you do have to do an MMI in the application process. Your interview offers are based on your ATAR and your UCAT, and your final offers will be based on a third each of your ATAR, UCAT, and MMI. There are 2 prerequisites for Monash University. The first is English and the second is chemistry. The application process process is done through VTAC, which is something that I'll explain a little bit more about later. The second medical school in Victoria is the University of Melbourne. However, this is a postgraduate pathway, but they do have a guaranteed entry pathway as well. The length of this course is 3 years of undergraduate study and then 4 years of postgraduate study, so you should be careful about that when you're thinking about how long you might be at university for. The ATAR requirement for this course is a 99.9 for a Commonwealth supported place, which is something I mentioned before, or a 99 for a non-Commonwealth supported place. Now, this is really important to consider for this pathway because if you really want to get in, you might be able to get in with a 99 plus ATAR, but you have to consider that you might be paying upwards of $300,000 in tuition fees. To explain what this program is a little bit more, what it is that if you enter the University of Melbourne with a 99.9 plus ATAR or a 99 plus ATAR, they tell you that you can enter their postgraduate Doctor of Medicine pathway without having to do the GAMSAT as long as you pass an MMI interview in your 3rd year after you've done your undergraduate course. Now, this can be a really good pathway actually for some people with very high ATARs, because you don't actually have to do the UCAT and you can get that guaranteed entry into postgraduate medicine as long as you pass that interview. There aren't any prerequisites for this course and the application process is also through VTAC. So now I'll just talk quickly about VTAC and what it actually is. So VTAC is the Victorian Tertiary Admissions Centre, and what it is it's the place where you submit your applications for any Victorian university. The important thing to know about VTAC is that their timely course application close date, which is when you usually have to submit your applications for medicine, is the 30th of September at 5 p.m. exactly. I'll have some more helpful links to all of the Victorian universities and VTACs included in the guide that I include at the end of this video. Now let's move on to the second state that I'll talk about, which is New South Wales, which has 4 medical schools that you should know about. The first of these is an undergraduate program, which is at the University of New South Wales, or UNSW. A little bit about this course is that the course length is 6 years, and the ATAR is a 96 minimum requirement. However, you will need an ATAR probably much higher than that due to the competitiveness of the course. To get in, you also have to do the UCAT and you also have to do an interview, and your interview offers are based on your ATAR and your UCAT, although the weighting isn't actually known. The final offer that you end up getting given is based on the ATAR plus your UCAT plus your interview, and the weighting for that isn't known as well. There is a prerequisite for this course, and that is English, and that is considered as assumed knowledge on their website. The application process for the UNSW medicine program is actually a little bit different because you have to do it both through the UAC, which is the sort of New South Wales and ACT admission center, and also through the UNSW website. UNSW has this medicine application portal or map, and through it you have to answer a few questions about your motivations to do medicine and what sort of events in your life have changed the way you think. The second medical school that I'll talk about in New South Wales is the University of Western Sydney and Charles Sturt University, which is a joint medical program and an undergraduate course. So the length of this course is 5 years, and the ATAR requirement is 95.5 for non-Greater Western Sydney applicants and 93.5 for Greater Western Sydney applicants. If you don't know what a Greater Western Sydney and non-Greater Western Sydney applicant is, it probably doesn't apply to you, so don't worry about it. In addition, to get in, you need the UCAT and you need to do an interview as well, and your interview offers are based 100% on your UCAT score, so do be aware of that. Your final offers are then also based on 75% on your interview and then 25% on your UCAT. There aren't any prerequisites for this course, and then you have to apply through the UAC. The third medical school that I'll talk about in New South Wales is the University of Sydney, which is a provisional pathway like the one at the University of Medicine, and therefore it's a postgraduate pathway as well. So as a result, the length of this course is 3 years of undergraduate study and then another 4 years of postgrad study. There is no UCAT required, but the ATAR you need is extremely high, which is a 99.95 ATAR to get in. You are required to do an interview even if you have that ATAR, and then your final offers aren't even based on your ATAR, but only on your interview and how well you do in that. The application for this is also done through the UAC. Now, the last medical school I'll talk about in New South Wales is the University of Newcastle and the University of New England, which are doing an undergraduate joint medical program degree. For this course, the length is 5 years. The ATAR required is minimum of 94.3. The UCAT is required, an interview is required, and then your interview offers are based 100% on your UCAT. Your final offers are actually also based 100% on your your interview. So in the end, you only have to pass a hurdle requirement for your ATAR, and once you've just passed that ATAR requirement, it's all based on your UCAT and your interview. There aren't any prerequisites for this course, and the way you apply is through the UAC, and you also have to supply an online application form. So now I'll talk quickly about the UAC. The UAC is very similar to VTAC in Victoria, except it applies for ACT and New South Wales. The important thing you should know about the UAC is that the timely applications close on midnight on the 30th of September in 2021. So it's very important to consider that it's actually slightly different to the VTAC's timely application close time. Something to note is that since there are a lot more undergraduate universities in New South Wales, you should actually think really carefully about how you want to do your preferences in the UAC, because some universities you might have a higher chance of getting into, because do keep in mind that some of them only think about your UCAT and your interview, whereas for example UNSW does consider your ATAR. As with the Victorian universities, I'll have links to all of these New South Wales universities and to the UAC in the guide that I include at the end of this video. Now the next state that I'll move on to talk about will be Western Australia, which has 2 medical schools. The first of these is the University of Western Australia, which runs a postgraduate provisional entry pathway. Now this is very similar to what is done at the University of Melbourne and also at the University of Sydney. So you'll have to do 3 years of undergraduate study and then also 3 years of postgraduate study, which means that you'll be studying for a total of 6 years. The ATAR required is a 99 for most applicants. The UCAT is required, and you're also required to do an interview. Your interview offers are based 100% on your UCAT performance, and then your final offers are based a third on your UCAT, your ATAR, and your interview. The prerequisite you're required to do is English, which is considered assumed knowledge, and the application process is done through TISC. The next university that I'll talk about in Western Australia is Curtin University, which offers an undergraduate medical program. The length of this course is 5 years, and the ATAR required is 95 minimum, and you are required to do a UCAT and an interview to get in as well. Your interview offers are based on 60% of your ATAR and then 40% based on your UCAT. And then your final offers are based on 40% of your ATAR, 20% on your UCAT, and 40% on your interview. Thinking a little bit about that weighting, this might be a university that you'd want to apply to if, for example, you thought that your UCAT score wasn't as competitive as your ATAR might be. The prerequisites you have to do are English and chemistry, and the application is also through TISC, which I'll now move on to talk a little bit about. TISC is the application portal for those people in Western Australia. The important thing to note about TISC is that the timely application close time is 11 PM on the 30th of September 2021. So this again is different to that in New South Wales and in Victoria, so do be careful about that. As always, you guessed it, the links to these universities and to the TISC website will be in the guide that I include at the end of the video. The next state that I talk about will be South Australia, and again there are 2 medical schools that you should know about in South Australia that you might want to apply to. Alright, so the first medical school that you should know about in South Australia is the University of Adelaide, which offers an undergraduate medical program. The length of this course is 6 years, and the ATAR required is a 90 minimum. You are required to have a UCAT, and you are required to do an interview as well, and your interview offers are based on your UCAT only. However, when it comes to your final offers, the weighting is 40% on your ATAR, 20% on your UCAT, and 40% on your interview. The prerequisites for this university are a bit interesting because you need 1 of chemistry, biology, or maths, and the application process is through SATAC or SATAC. The second university that you should know about in South Australia is Flinders University, which also offers an undergraduate program. The length of this course is 6 years, and the ATAR required is 95, although you will need an ATAR much higher than that due to competitiveness. You do have to do the UCAT, but you don't actually need an interview, so your final place offer weighting is based on 90% on your ATAR and 10% on your UCAT. There aren't any prerequisites, and the application process is done through SATAC. So with SATAC, it's important to know that the timely close of applications is on the 30th of September as well, although I looked on the website but I couldn't find a time anywhere. So be really careful for that, and make sure you submit at least on the 29th of September so you don't have to worry about it. You already know where the links will be, so I'll just move on to the next state, which is Queensland, which has 3 medical schools that you should know about. So the first medical school that you should know about in Queensland is James Cook University, which is an undergraduate university. The length of this course is 6 years. You do need an ATAR, but the interesting thing about James Cook is that you don't need a UCAT score to get in. You are required to do an interview though. Your interview offers are based on your rurality, your ATAR, and your written application, which I'll talk about soon. The final offers that they give are based on your rurality, your ATAR, and your interview, and the application process is done through QTAC, and there is actually a written application that you have to print out, get signed and sent through. So make sure you have a look at the written application process for James Cook University well before the actual closing date of the application process. The second university that I'll talk about is Griffith University, which is a postgraduate and provisional pathway. So the length of this course is 2 years of undergraduate study and then 4 years of postgraduate study, which will mean that you can finish the whole degree in 6 years. The ATAR you need is a 99.7. The important thing to know again is that the UCAT is not required and an interview is not required as well. So as a result, your final offers are only based on your ATAR, so 100% on your ATAR. The prerequisites for this course are English, which is assumed knowledge, and then you have the application process, which is done through QTAC. So the next one that I'll talk about is the University of Queensland, which is a provisional and postgraduate pathway. So this one you have to do 3 years of undergraduate study, and then you get entry into the 4 years of postgraduate medicine. The ATAR required is a 95, but you will need a higher one due to the competitiveness of the applicants. The UCAT is also required, and you have to do an interview as well. Your interview offers are based 100% on your UCAT, so you will need a decently good UCAT to get in, and then your final offers are based on your UCAT plus your ATAR plus your interview, and the weighting is not known. The prerequisite for this course is English, and the application process is also through QTAC. So for a little bit of information on QTAC, the timely application close date is the 30th of September in 2021. Again, they didn't include the time that the application's closed, so I'd make sure to do it at least a day before on the 29th just to be really safe. The other thing to know is that QTAC also, again, since there's a couple of universities in Queensland that you should know about, make sure you have your list of preferences and which ones you think you'd be most likely to get into so that you can set the one that you might want to get into most as your first preference. There is actually one more university in Queensland, and that's Bond University, which has a medical program. But the reason I didn't include that in this guide is because I actually know nothing about that application process, and if I was giving you guys some information, that could possibly be wrong. So now I'll just move on to the last state of this guide, which will be Tasmania, which has one medical school that you should know about. This medical school is the University of Tasmania, which offers an undergraduate medical program. Its length is 5 years long, and the ATAR required is a 95, although it's very likely that you'd need a ATAR much higher than that to actually get in. You are required to do the UCAT, however, there is actually no interview required, and there's not much information on what they give their final offers based on either. There are 2 prerequisites, which are English and chemistry, and the application process is actually done straight through the University of Tasmania website. I had a look around, and it seems that the timely application close date for the University of Tasmania is 5 p.m. on the 30th of September 2021. So as you can see, now that we've gone through pretty much all the universities, the application time is essentially on the 30th of September. It just depends on what time you actually have to submit it by, but honestly, you should just make sure to submit at least a week before, otherwise you'd be cutting it fine for sure. Okay, so now let's move on to the last part of this video, which is about the resources that you can use and access to get a better idea of the application process. The first thing that I'll recommend is the guide that I have actually written up for this video. The best way to find this guide will be by accessing it through a link in my latest weekly email newsletter. All you have to do is click on the link in the description below or in the comments, and you can access it by just clicking on my last edition or the 3rd edition and then scrolling all the way down, and you should be able to see a Google Drive link which will have a PDF of the guide that I've been using to show you guys about the universities. In terms of other information that's free and readily available, I highly recommend that you check out the Med Students Online Forum, because it's one of the best places to get information from people like me who have gone through the medicine application process and who have gotten into universities. So it's really useful because you can see certain pieces of data like collated data of med and dent offers in 2021, and you can also see lots of experiences and people sharing their experiences in medicine as well. That wraps up this video about the application process to medicine in Australia. I hope you guys found it comprehensive and that you have an idea of which universities that you might actually want to apply to. As always, my DMs are always open if you have any questions, and try checking out this video about what UCAT score you might need to get into medicine.